Lesson 13. How to actually score a trading strategy. Let me put you in a situation you've probably already been in if you've backtested more than one strategy. You've got two strategies sitting in front of you. One ended a 30-day backtest up 30%. The other ended up 18%. Which one is better? Your gut says the 30% one. Obviously. But here is the catch. The 30% strategy had a drawdown of 25% along the way. It made 180 trades, which means fees ate a real chunk of that. And when you test it on a fresh chunk of data it never saw, the performance collapses to barely break even. Meanwhile, the 18% strategy had a max drawdown of 4%, made 40 clean trades, and held up almost as well on data it had never seen. The 18% strategy is the better one, by a lot. And if you'd picked by the single number everyone picks by, you'd have chosen wrong. That is the problem a scoring system solves. In this lesson, I want to walk you through one that has worked well for me, with the reasoning behind every part, so you can adapt it to your own taste instead of copying it blindly. The 4 things that actually matter when I score a strategy. I look at 4 things, in roughly this order of importance: returns, risk, stability, and practicality. I weight them 40% returns, 30% risk, 20% stability, and 10% practicality. We'll go through each. Notice that returns is less than half the total weight. That is deliberate. Most people put almost all the weight on returns, which is exactly why most people pick the wrong strategy. Returns are how a strategy looks. Risk and stability are how it actually behaves. The whole point of scoring is to force yourself to look at the rest. Returns. But with context inside the returns bucket, I look at 3 numbers: total return over the backtest, annualized return, and average profit per trade. Total return is the obvious one. Over a 30-day backtest, I'd call anything above 15% excellent, 10 to 15 good, 5 to 10 acceptable, anything below 5 weak, and a loss is a loss. Straightforward. But total return on its own is misleading, because it depends entirely on how long you backtested for. That is where annualized return comes in. You convert whatever you made into what it would imply over a full year. A 15% gain over 30 days, compounded, is something like 743% annualized. The same 15% over 90 days is around 68% annualized. Same number, very different strategies. Annualized lets you compare strategies tested over different windows apples to apples. Here is the honest caveat though, and I want you to hold on to it. Annualized numbers from short backtests are basically fantasy. A strategy that doubles in 30 days almost never compounds that way for a full year. Markets change, liquidity changes, your edge decays. Use annualized return to compare strategies, not as a prediction of what you'll actually make. The third number in this bucket is the one I actually care about most, and that is average profit per trade. Total return tells you what happened over the whole test. Average profit per trade tells you how efficient each individual decision was. A strategy that made 20% over 200 trades is very different from one that made 20% over 30 trades. I'd call anything above 1.5% per trade excellent, 1.0 to 1.5 good, 0.5 to 1.0 acceptable, and anything below 0.2% a warning sign, because at that point fees and slippage will eat most of your edge. Risk. The part people skip. This is where I want you to slow down, because this is the bucket that protects you from blowing up. The first number is maximum drawdown. That is the biggest drop from a peak to a trough in your equity curve during the backtest. Anything under 5% is excellent. 5 to 10 is good. 10 to 15 is getting uncomfortable. 15 to 20 is poor. And anything above 20% I score a 0. Because at that point you are risking disaster for unclear reward. Here is why drawdown matters more than people realize. Drawdowns are not symmetric. A 10% drawdown needs an 11.1% gain to recover. A 20% drawdown needs a 25% gain. A 50% drawdown needs a 100% gain. The deeper the hole, the harder the climb back. And the math gets brutal fast. A strategy that occasionally drops 40% is not a strategy you'll actually hold through the drop. You'll panic and sell at the bottom. So even on paper, treat a big drawdown as a disqualifier. The second number is the Sharpe ratio, which is the closest thing we have to a single risk-adjusted return number. It tells you how much return you are getting per unit of volatility. A sharp above 3 is excellent. 2 to 3 is good. 1 to 2 is acceptable. Below 1 you are barely being compensated for the volatility, and negative means the strategy lost money on a risk-adjusted basis, which is a hard no. The third is the Kalmar ratio, which is annualized return divided by maximum drawdown. I like Kalmar because it directly asks the question every trader should be asking, which is, how much am I making for how much pain I am taking? A strategy making 60% annualized with a 10% drawdown has a Kalmar of 6. That is excellent. A strategy making 80% annualized with a 25% drawdown has a Kalmar of about 3.2. It looks fancier on the return side, but it is actually the worst deal. Kalmar forces you to notice stability, or whether it'll keep working. Returns tell you what happened. Risk tells you how bad it got. Stability tells you whether what happened was a pattern or a fluke. The first stability number is win rate, the percentage of trades that closed in profit. Above 80% is excellent, 70 to 80 good, 60 to 70 acceptable, and below 50 is rough. But here is the thing I want to flag, and it trips up everyone starting out. Win rate in isolation is close to meaningless. You have to pair it with the risk-reward ratio. A strategy with a 40% win rate where winners are 3 times the size of losers can absolutely outperform a strategy with an 80% win rate where winners and losers are the same size. High win rate feels good psychologically, but it is not what makes money. Don't optimize for it in isolation. The second stability number is profit factor, which is total profit from winning trades divided by total loss from losing trades. So if you made $1,200 on winners and lost $400 on losers, your profit factor is 3.0. Anything above 2.5 is excellent, 2.0 to 2.5, good 1.5 to 2.0 acceptable, and below 1.2 is a strategy barely above water. Below 1.0 means it loses money. Profit factor is one of my favorite single numbers because it bakes in both win rate and risk reward in one shot. If profit factor is healthy, the strategy is fundamentally sound, regardless of how the win rate looks. The third stability number is the standard deviation of returns across periods, usually quarters. If your 4 quarters returned 8, 12, 9, and 11%, the standard deviation is tiny, and that is what you want. Smooth. If the quarters returned 25, minus 10, 30, and minus 5, the average might look fine, but the variance tells you the strategy is a roller coaster. Standard deviation below 3% is excellent. Above 12% is poor. Practicality, the boring bucket that saves you. This is the bucket people skip, and it is the one that determines whether a strategy survives contact with live trading. Trade frequency matters. Over a 30-day backtest, somewhere between 20 and 60 trades is ideal. Below 5 trades and the sample is too small to mean anything. You could just be looking at luck. Above 100 and you are overtrading, and fees become a serious drag. Above 150, and you are in high-frequency territory, where you are competing on infrastructure, and you will lose that fight. Average holding time matters too. 2 to 24 hours is the sweet spot for most spot crypto strategies. Under an hour and you are into high-frequency risk, where execution, speed, and fees dominate. Over 48 hours and you are carrying overnight risk, where a gap move against you can blow straight through your stop before the next candle even opens. And the last one, which I think is the most important practicality metric, is out-of-sample performance. This is the share of the in-sample return that the strategy still produces when you run it on data. It was never tuned on. If your training period returned 20% and the test period returns 17%, your out-of-sample retention is 85%. That is a solid result. Above 90% is excellent. Below 40% is basically overfit. And I'd score it 0, because what you have isn't a strategy. It is a memorized answer key. If you only take one thing from this lesson, take that. The out-of-sample test is the one number that actually tells you whether you have something real. Everything else can be gamed, accidentally or on purpose. Out-of-sample can't. Putting it all together so the full system is 12 metrics across those 4 buckets, each scored from 0 to 10, each multiplied by its weight, all summed up to a total out of 10. The weights I use are roughly 15% each for total return, average profit, and max drawdown, 10% each for annualized return and sharp, 5% each for Kalmar and consistency, 8% for win rate, 7% for profit factor, and 4, 3, and 3% for trade frequency, holding time, and out of sample. You don't need to memorize those numbers. The point is that no single metric dominates. You can have a strategy with mediocre returns but excellent risk and stability that scores well overall. And that is usually the strategy you actually want to run live. The grades I use are simple. Anything above 9 is an S, top tier. 8 to 9 is an excellent. 7 to 8 is a B, good enough for live with small size. 6 to 7 is a C, use cautiously. 5 to 6 is a D, needs work. Below 5 is an F. Don't trade it. Let me give you 2 concrete examples, so this isn't abstract. The first is a momentum trend strategy I tested. Total return of about 23.5% over the backtest. Annualized around 153%. Average profit per trade of 1.52%. Max drawdown of just 3.2%. Sharp of 3.5. Kalmar over 8. Win rate around 90%. Profit factor 2.8. Low variance in quarterly returns. Trade frequency slightly high at 68, but holding time clean at 6 hours. Out of sample retention around 88%. That strategy scored 9.36, an S grade. It earned the top rating because it wasn't just profitable. It was profitable with low risk, high stability, and it held up on data it had never seen. The second is a more average strategy. Total return of about 15%. Annualized around 92%. Average profit per trade of 0.85%, which is on the weaker side. Max drawdown of 6.8%. Fine but not great. Sharp of 2.1. Kalmar of 3.5. Win rate around 72%. Profit factor 1.8. Variance on the higher side. Trade frequency of 127, which is too high and is going to bleed fees. Out of sample retention of 72%. Decent, but not strong. That strategy scored 7.68, a B grade. It is a usable strategy. But the scoring made it obvious where the weaknesses are. Trade frequency is too high and out of sample is mediocre, which together suggests some overfitting. And that is actually the hidden value of a scoring system. It doesn't just give you a ranking, it diagnoses. When a strategy scores a B and the lowest individual scores are in trade frequency and out of sample, you know exactly what to work on. You don't have to guess. A few things I want you to be honest about. The weights I gave you are not sacred. They're a starting point. If you are a more conservative trader, you should shift weight from returns toward risk. Maybe drop returns to 25% and push risk to 45%. If you are trading small size and can psychologically handle drawdowns, you can tilt the other way. The point is to choose your weights deliberately, write them down, and use them consistently, rather than eyeballing strategies, and picking the one that feels good. The second thing is that scoring is not a one-time exercise. Strategies decay. A strategy that scored an A in January might be a C by July, because the market regime shifted. You should rescore your strategies on a regular cadence, monthly at minimum, and rerun the out-of-sample test whenever you've made changes to the logic. The third thing, and this is the one I see people abuse most, is don't tune the weights to flatter the strategy you want to win. It is the same disease as overfitting parameters. You can absolutely rig a scoring system to give the answer you want, and you'll feel clever right up until the market takes the money. Use the scoring system to find out the truth, including when the truth is inconvenient. And the last caveat, a high score is not a guarantee. A strategy that scores a 9.3 on a backtest can still lose money live. Markets do things they've never done before. Execution differs from simulation, and fees and slippage in live trading are almost always worse than what the backtest assumed. The scoring system improves your odds of picking a real edge. It doesn't remove the risk. Nothing does. What I want you to take from this lesson is simple. Stop evaluating strategies by total return alone. Build a scorecard, even a simple one, that forces you to look at risk, stability, and out-of-sample performance before you trust a strategy with capital. The first time you score two strategies side by side, and the higher returning one scores lower, you'll understand why this matters. That moment is when you stop being someone who is impressed by backtests and start being someone who can actually read them.